The vibrant morning sun, a generous cascade of molten gold, filtered through the ancient maple leaves, painting Redwood Street in the quaint, serene town of Springdale, Oregon. The air itself hummed with the fresh, invigorating scent of newly mown grass, subtly mingling with the elusive, sweet fragrance of yeast and cinnamon wafting from the Golden Bagel Bakery, perched invitingly on the corner of Highland Avenue. James "Jim" Callahan, a man whose 72 years sat firmly on his broad, still powerful shoulders, ambled along the sidewalk, his hands comfortably tucked into the pockets of his faded, well-loved jeans. He wore a simple flannel shirt, the soft, worn fabric a testament to countless washings, beneath a scuffed leather jacket. A glimpse of a t-shirt peeked from beneath the jacket's collar, bearing the proud, yet understated, legend: Vietnam Veteran. Jim was one of those rare individuals whose presence didn't demand attention, yet whose inner strength resonated quietly, like a deep, unwavering hum. His face, a landscape etched with the deep furrows of time, was a living map of his life's journey, each line a silent chronicle of the searing heat of Vietnamese battlefields, the arduous, often lonely struggle of post-war adjustment, the quiet joys of family life, and the profound ache of loss. He had served with distinction in the Marine Corps, wounded during the harrowing Tet Offensive, and carried a persistent fragment of shrapnel in his thigh, a constant dull throb that served as a tangible link to a past that never truly receded. Yet despite these physical burdens, Jim remained a man of remarkable resilience and profound kindness. His silver hair, meticulously combed back from his weathered forehead, framed eyes the color of a summer sky, perpetually alight with a soft, often melancholic glow. Today held a special significance. Jim was on his way to the Springdale Hearts Animal Shelter, eager to pick up a small puppy he intended as a joyous surprise for his 7-year-old granddaughter, Abigail. Abigail, a whirlwind of spirited energy with mischievous green eyes, had harbored a deep longing for a dog, and Jim, understanding the tender compass of her young heart, had decided to fulfill that quiet yearning. In his hand, carefully wrapped in a cheerful plaid cloth, he carried a freshly baked bone-shaped dog biscuit, a delightful treat he had selected with care from Pet's Planet on Main Street. His route took him past Riverwood Elementary School, its brick facade bathed in the morning sun. A lively throng of parents and children bustled near the school gates, their excited chatter filling the air. Suddenly, from around the corner, a bright yellow Ford Bronco SUV, its tinted windows gleaming, its massive custom wheels practically vibrating with suppressed power, peeled around the bend at an alarming speed. The bass of the music thumping within its cabin was so intense that the vehicle's windows literally rattled. Behind the wheel sat a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, with a close-cropped haircut and a self-satisfied smirk that he clearly believed exuded effortless charm. This was Brock Gunner, a name synonymous with arrogance and privilege in Springdale, the son of the town's prominent real estate mogul, Jeffrey Gunner. Brock operated under the misguided conviction that rules were for lesser mortals, and his behavior frequently bordered on the outright audacious. Beside him, two of his cronies, Randy Poole and Vince Brady, equally well-heeled and equally entitled, mirrored Brock's sneering contempt for anyone outside their gilded circle. As the opulent SUV bore down on the school, children were already streaming across the crosswalk, a colorful, innocent river of youth. One small boy, utterly engrossed in a new toy clutched in his hand, lagged slightly behind his mother. Brock, with a blatant disregard for safety, showed no inclination to slow down, roaring towards the oblivious child. The boy's mother, her voice a guttural cry of pure terror, shrieked a warning. Brock, with a sudden, violent stomp on the brakes, brought the massive vehicle to a screeching halt, its tires leaving long, angry black streaks on the asphalt. The boy stumbled, falling to the ground, shaken to his core but thankfully unharmed. Jim, who had been strolling along the sidewalk, a silent witness to the near tragedy, felt a slow, simmering indignation ignite within him. As a father and a grandfather, the sight of a child almost falling victim to such reckless abandon stirred a deep, primal anger in his soul. He walked with purpose towards Brock's vehicle. "Hey, son, what in God's name are you doing?" Jim's voice, though firm, remained remarkably calm, a testament to years of disciplined control. "This is a school zone. Children are here. You could have killed that boy." Brock slowly lowered his window, his face contorted into a sneering mask of irritation. His eyes, cold and dismissive, swept over Jim, as if assessing a bothersome insect. "Who in the hell are you, old-timer, to tell me what to do?" Brock drawled, his voice thick with an insolent swagger, rough from too many late nights and too little respect. "This is my car, and I'll drive it any damn way I please. Now get out of my way before I run you over." Randy and Vince, still seated in the passenger seats, snickered, clearly relishing the spectacle unfolding before them. "Some people need to be taught manners," Jim stated, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly, a subtle shift in their usual placid expression. "Sometimes a few hard lessons are all it takes to understand what responsibility truly means." Brock's smirk widened, a cruel, predatory curve of his lips. "Are you threatening me, old man? Do you even know who I am?" "I don't care who you are," Jim responded, his voice unwavering, his gaze direct and fearless. "You're a menace, and you have no business driving if you can't do it safely." Brock, his face blotchy with barely contained fury, flung open his door and stepped out. He was significantly taller and considerably younger than Jim, his muscular physique hinting at countless hours spent in a gym, cultivating an outward show of power. "I'll show you who's a menace, you old fool!" Brock snarled, his fists clenching at his sides. Jim did not flinch, did not take a single step back. He stood his ground, calm and unwavering, his gaze locked with Brock's. In his eyes, there was no fear, no blazing anger, but rather a profound, almost philosophical disappointment in the depths of human idiocy. A crowd began to gather around them, drawn by the escalating tension. Parents who had witnessed the near miss watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of apprehension and indignation. Brock took a menacing step forward and shoved Jim hard in the chest. The blow was forceful, unexpected, and Jim, caught off guard by the sheer aggression, lost his balance, tumbling backward onto the unforgiving asphalt. The dog biscuit, his small gift for Abigail's puppy, flew from his grasp, rolling with a pathetic bounce beneath a parked car. "There, old man," Brock sneered, looking down at Jim sprawled on the ground. "That's a lesson for sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Randy and Vince, emerging from the SUV, stood beside Brock, their faces alight with cruel amusement. "He's just some crazy old coot," Randy scoffed, nudging Vince. "Probably senile." Jim slowly pushed himself up, his movements deliberate, unhurried. A thin trickle of blood traced a path down his cheek from a scrape, and his jeans were smudged with dirt. He said nothing, simply fixed his gaze on Brock. And in his eyes, there was a quiet, cold steel that made Brock, for a fleeting instant, profoundly uneasy. "What are you looking at, Grandpa?" Brock attempted to reassert his flagging confidence, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained. "Want some more?" Jim merely brushed himself off, his motions slow, measured, almost theatrical in their quiet dignity. He walked calmly to the parked car, stooped down, and retrieved the biscuit, carefully inspecting it as if assessing the damage. The crowd around them continued to swell, hushed whispers giving way to murmurs of disapproval. A few parents, emboldened by the growing numbers, began to voice their outrage. "What are you doing? Leave the old man alone!" one woman cried out, her voice trembling with indignation. "Mind your own business," Brock shot back, his face contorted in a sneer. "He brought this on himself." At that precise moment, the school's principal, Mr. Patrick O'Malley, emerged from the school building. He was an older gentleman, his silver hair neatly combed, his face stern but kind, usually etched with the benevolent concern of an educator. He had heard the commotion and stepped out to investigate. "What in the world is going on here?" Mr. O'Malley's voice, though not loud, carried an undeniable authority. He immediately recognized Brock Gunner, whose reputation for trouble preceded him. "Nothing, Mr. O'Malley," Brock replied, attempting to adopt an air of innocent victimhood, though his eyes darted nervously. "This old man attacked me." "Attacked you?" Mr. O'Malley's eyebrows shot up in disbelief, his gaze sweeping from the shaken child, still recovering from his fall, to Jim, who stood calmly, brushing dust from his jacket. "I witnessed you nearly hit a child, Brock, and I also witnessed you shove this gentleman." Brock's face darkened, a flush of anger spreading across his cheeks. "He provoked me. Provoked you into shoving an elderly man?" Mr. O'Malley's voice turned chillingly cold, each word delivered with precision. "Brock, I am deeply disappointed in your behavior. And I assure you, I will be contacting your father about this incident immediately." At the mention of his father, Brock visibly blanched. Jeffrey Gunner, his father, was indeed a man of significant influence in Springdale, but he was also notoriously strict when it came to maintaining his carefully cultivated public image. "He's just some crazy old man. He's the one at fault," Brock mumbled, his earlier arrogance replaced by a pathetic whine. Jim, who had remained silent during this exchange, looked at Mr. O'Malley. "Don't trouble yourself, Principal. I don't require an apology from this young man. Just ensure he doesn't endanger any more children." Mr. O'Malley nodded, his expression grim. "I will absolutely see to it, sir. Are you quite all right? Do you need any medical attention?" "I'm perfectly fine," Jim replied, his voice calm. "Just disheartened that some people have forgotten the most basic rules of decency." As they spoke, Brock, Randy, and Vince, seizing the opportunity, scrambled back into the SUV. Brock revved the engine, then peeled away from the curb with a violent jerk, leaving a choking cloud of exhaust fumes and the angry screech of tires in his wake. He cast one last venomous glare at Jim through the rearview mirror, a silent promise that this encounter was far from over. Jim calmly watched the yellow SUV disappear around the bend. He felt a dull ache begin to throb in his thigh, the old shrapnel wound protesting the fall. But it was not a pain that could break his spirit. In his eyes, a quiet fire still burned, a fire that had seen far more than young Brock Gunner could ever comprehend. This is just the beginning. You won't believe who stepped in to help him. It's going to get much more intense. The lingering tension, thick and suffocating, remained palpable in the air, a silent testament to the raw emotions unleashed by Brock Gunner's reckless disregard. Teachers, their faces a mixture of concern and simmering indignation, moved with a newfound urgency, herding their students back into the relative safety of the school. Mr. O'Malley, the principal, guided Jim to a weathered bench nestled beneath the sprawling, ancient oak tree that presided over the schoolyard. The principal's face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin, determined line. "Mr. Callahan, I cannot begin to express how truly sorry I am that this transpired," Mr. O'Malley stated, his voice thick with genuine remorse. "Brock Gunner's behavior is utterly reprehensible. I will be contacting his father, Jeffrey Gunner, immediately. I fear this is not the first time Brock has caused trouble, but this time he has crossed a line that cannot be ignored. Jim sat, his hands gently rubbing his bruised thigh, where a faint purplish discoloration was already beginning to bloom beneath the worn denim. He looked at the principal with a quiet, understanding gaze. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. O'Malley, but I fear a simple phone call won't change that boy. He needs a real lesson, not just a lecture from his father." "I understand your sentiments, sir." Mr. O'Malley sighed, a heavy weight seemingly settling on his shoulders. "Jeffrey Gunner. He's a very influential man in Springdale. His son has always felt untouchable, shielded by his father's power. But I assure you, I will do everything within my power. I will file an official report about this incident, and I will be contacting the police." Jim nodded slowly, his gaze drifting across the schoolyard where children, though now safely corralled, were still huddled in small groups, their hushed whispers dissecting the morning's unsettling drama. In Jim's eyes, there was a profound weariness born of senseless aggression, yet also a subtle glint of anticipation. He knew that Jeffrey Gunner, despite his considerable influence, would not be able to entirely shield his son from the consequences if this matter escalated to a serious degree. As Jim prepared to leave, the woman who had courageously shouted at Brock earlier approached him. She introduced herself as Laura Mason, the mother of the small boy who had narrowly escaped injury. Her face was still pale from the raw shock of the near tragedy, but her eyes, though wide, burned with a fierce, protective anger. "Mr. Callahan, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart," Laura said, her voice trembling slightly, still raw with emotion. "You were the only one who dared to stand up for my son. I saw that maniac shove you. It was absolutely appalling. We simply have to do something about him." "I will do everything I can, ma'am," Jim replied, his voice firm, unwavering. "I'm not one to back down from bullies. You can rest assured, this will not simply disappear." Laura extended a business card, her hand trembling slightly as she offered it. "I'm an attorney, Mr. Callahan. If you need any legal assistance, or if you decide to press charges against that hooligan, please, do not hesitate to call me. I would be honored to assist you. Pro bono." Jim took the card, his fingers brushing hers, and offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Thank you, Ms. Mason. I will keep that in mind." He began to walk slowly away from the school, a slight limp now more pronounced than usual. The remainder of the day unfolded in a quiet, contemplative haze. Jim eventually made his way to Springdale Heart's animal shelter, and, after careful consideration, chose the smallest, most impossibly fluffy puppy. A golden retriever with eyes that held a hint of puppy sadness, yet sparkled with an intelligent curiosity. He named him Buddy. The tiny creature was gently wrapped in a warm, soft blanket, and Jim carried him home with an almost reverent tenderness, feeling the comforting thrum of the little heart beating against his own. But even the nascent joy of welcoming a new member to his quiet family could not entirely displace the lingering echoes of the morning's disturbing incident from his thoughts. That evening, as Jim settled into his worn, familiar rocking chair, gently stroking the peacefully slumbering Buddy nestled on his lap, the sharp ring of the telephone shattered the quiet domesticity. It was Mr. O'Malley. "Mr. Callahan, I just spoke with Jeffrey Gunner." The principal's voice was taut, strained with barely suppressed tension. He was incredibly aggressive. He claimed that you provoked his son, and that he will protect Brock by any means necessary. He even threatened my job if I dared to file a police report." Jim's grip tightened on the phone receiver. "So, that's how it is. He believes money can solve everything, does he?" "It certainly seems that way, sir," Mr. O'Malley replied, his voice heavy with resignation. He's a very influential man in town. He funds many local projects, has connections at City Hall and with the police. I'm afraid this could be a rather complicated matter." "Complicated, perhaps, but not impossible," Jim stated calmly, his voice imbued with a quiet, unyielding resolve. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley. You've done all you could. Now, it's my turn." Jim gently replaced the receiver in its cradle. He looked down at Buddy, who let out a soft, contented sigh in his sleep. "Well, little fella," Jim whispered, his voice a low rumble. "Looks like we might have a little bit of trouble on our hands. But we'll manage. We always have." The very next morning, as Jim stepped out of his modest house, a most unwelcome surprise awaited him. His mailbox, violently ripped from its post, lay crumpled on the ground. Scrawled across his pristine white picket fence in an angry slash of red spray paint was a crude, offensive word. It was unmistakably Brock Gunner's handiwork, a petty yet deeply malicious act of vandalism, clearly intended as a blunt instrument of intimidation. Jim felt a hot surge of righteous anger rise within him, a familiar, unwelcome guest. But he swiftly reined it in, his decades of discipline asserting themselves. He knew this was merely a childish gambit, a desperate attempt to throw him off balance, and he would not give them the satisfaction. With a quiet, methodical resolve, he calmly bent down and began to inspect the mangled mailbox, assessing the damage. Simultaneously, whispers began to ripple through the quiet currents of Springdale. Brock Gunner, eager to discredit Jim and deflect blame, began to propagate insidious rumors. He spun a narrative of a crazy veteran, a man suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, prone to irrational outbursts and unprovoked attacks on innocent teenagers. These insidious rumors, bolstered by Jeffrey Gunner's considerable influence and subtle manipulations, began to gain traction, spreading like a quiet wildfire. Some residents of Springdale, unaware of the full, ugly truth, began to cast wary, suspicious glances at Jim, their faces etched with a dawning apprehension. Jim felt the insidious weight of this pressure. He saw the averted gazes in the aisles of Fresh Market, heard the hushed snippets of conversation in the cozy confines of Cafe Oregon, their words dying abruptly as he drew near. It pained him, this casual injustice, this alarming readiness of people to embrace a convenient lie. But he refused to break. He had faced far worse adversaries, endured far greater trials in his long life. A few days later, as Jim was walking home from Springdale Vet Clinic, where he had taken Buddy for his first round of vaccinations, his path was abruptly blocked. Brock Gunner and his two loyal, if dim-witted companions, Randy and Vince, stood squarely in the middle of the sidewalk, their combined bulk forming an impenetrable barrier. "Well, Grandpa," Brock sneered, his voice dripping with an oily condescension. "How do you like our little present? Figured out who's boss yet?" Randy and Vince stood flanking him, their faces twisted into identical masks of smug malevolence. "You boys have crossed a line," Jim stated calmly, his voice devoid of heat, yet imbued with an unwavering authority. "And for that, there will be consequences." Brock let out a derisive, barking laugh, a sound utterly devoid of genuine mirth. "Consequences? For whom? You, old man? You think you're going to scare anyone here?" "I'm not trying to scare anyone," Jim replied, his gaze direct, penetrating, stripping away the layers of Brock's feigned bravado. "I'm simply going to teach you a lesson. A lesson your father, it seems, neglected to impart." Brock's composure shattered. He took a wild, lunging step forward, his arm swinging back, a clear intent to strike Jim's face. But before his fist could even make contact, Jim, with an unexpected agility that belied his age, deftly sidestepped the blow. Then, with a precision and speed that would have shamed a man half his age, he extended his leg. A swift, expert sweep that sent Brock sprawling to the asphalt with a resounding thud. Randy and Vince, momentarily stunned by the sudden, decisive countermove, stumbled backward, their faces registering a mixture of shock and disbelief. Brock, humiliated and enraged, scrambled quickly to his feet, his eyes blazing. "You crazy old bastard!" he roared, his voice thick with unbridled fury. "I'm going to tear you apart!" He lunged at Jim again, a desperate, uncontrolled attack. But this time, Jim did not evade. Instead, he braced himself, his body coiling, tensing like a steel spring, ready to meet the blow head-on. What is about to happen, no one could have predicted, but it is precisely what will finally bring justice. Marv. Brock's wild punch, though it ultimately failed to connect, sliced through the air with a venomous whistle, a stark testament to the raw, uncontrolled fury contorting his face. His eyes, burning with a mix of rage and mortified humiliation, bore into Jim. Despite his age and the slight dizziness that briefly accompanied the sudden, evasive maneuver, Jim remained utterly unyielding. He felt the familiar, unyielding steel rising within him, that same quiet resolve that had, more than once, been the solitary barrier between life and death in the sweltering, unforgiving jungles of Vietnam. He harbored no desire for a street brawl, but retreat was simply not an option. "Stop this, Brock." Jim's voice, though low, resonated with an unwavering authority, a quiet, unshakable power that momentarily froze Brock in his tracks. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." "Oh, I understand perfectly, old man." Brock shrieked, his voice climbing to a hysterical pitch, laced with a desperate, childish indignation. He lunged forward again, his fist arcing directly towards Jim's face, a desperate, flailing attempt to reclaim his lost dignity. But at that precise instant, as if conjured from the very fabric of the ordinary Springdale morning, a piercing, rapidly escalating sound rent the air. It was a sound that brought every single person on the street to a stunned, absolute halt, and caused Jim to instinctively raise his head, his gaze sweeping the sky. It was the unmistakable guttural thrumming of helicopter blades, not the familiar distant thwack of a local police chopper or the urgent, reedy whine of a medical transport, but the deep, resonant, impossibly powerful beat of a heavy-lift aircraft, approaching with an unnerving, almost predatory speed. The sky above Springdale, usually a canvas of tranquil blue, was suddenly engulfed by a deafening roar, a visceral vibration that caused windows in the surrounding houses to rattle ominously. Brock and his startled companions, their mouths agape, their faces a study in bewildered terror at the abrupt appearance of the airborne Leviathan, froze mid-street. They craned their necks skyward, their expressions a desperate melange of surprise and fear. The helicopter, a monstrous black predatory shadow, descended with terrifying swiftness, its massive rotor blades scything through the air, generating a cyclonic downdraft that stripped leaves from trees and whipped dust into furious miniature cyclones from the asphalt. People on the street instinctively ducked, shielding their faces with trembling hands. From the cavernous maw of the helicopter's open side door, a thick rope ladder unfurled with shocking speed, snaking down to the very asphalt below. And then, from within that dark opening, figures began to descend, rappelling with breathtaking speed and precision. They were special operations forces, clad in full tactical gear, black, form-fitting combat uniforms, helmets obscuring their faces behind dark visors, and formidable body armor. In their gloved hands, they carried light, yet undeniably lethal, combat weaponry. They descended with chilling efficiency, each movement fluid and synchronized, a perfectly choreographed machine of human precision. The first to touch down was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tactical helmet, his face utterly obscured by a dark visor. But Jim, his eyes, though dimmed by age, instantly recognized the silhouette, the authoritative bearing. It was Colonel Marcus Stinger Anderson, his former commanding officer from the elite Navy SEAL team, the man with whom he had navigated the fiery inferno of Vietnam. Marcus was widely considered one of the most revered and legendary officers in the entire American military, a man forged of iron will and an unblemished reputation. Marcus swiftly scanned the street, his gaze locking onto Jim, who stood amidst the swirling dust and dancing leaves, and then sweeping over the cluster of utterly bewildered teenagers. He moved with a series of quick, purposeful strides towards Jim, while the other Special Operations operatives instantly fanned out, forming an impenetrable perimeter around the old veteran and the terrified teenagers. Their collective presence was so overwhelmingly potent, so utterly menacing, that Brock and his cronies simply froze in place, their faces bleached as white as bleached bone. "Jim, are you all right?" Marcus's voice, amplified by the microphone in his helmet, cut through the thundering roar of the helicopter with an almost uncanny clarity and command. Jim nodded, a wide, genuine smile spreading across his lips, erasing the lines of weariness. "Perfectly fine, Marcus. Just a little dusty." Marcus leaned closer to Jim, his eyes, visible through the dark visor of his helmet, conveying a profound, almost paternal concern. "What happened here? Why did you have to use the call sign?" The call sign. That was it. The very word. Jim, during his distinguished service in Special Operations, possessed a personal, deeply private call sign. Old Snake. He rarely, if ever, used it, reserving it only for the most dire and critical situations, when immediate and decisive assistance was absolutely paramount. It was more than a mere identifier. It was a personal distress signal, understood only by a handful of men from his past, men who had shared the crucible of combat with him, Marcus Anderson foremost among them. "Some young men decided they could wreak havoc with impunity," Jim answered calmly, his gaze briefly sweeping over the pale, terrified faces of Brock, Randy, and Vince. "I had to remind them that every action has consequences." Marcus straightened, his gaze hard and piercing, settling on Brock. "You did this?" Marcus's voice was low, laced with an unmistakable chilling menace. "You assaulted this man?" Brock, his knees visibly trembling, stammered out, I didn't do anything. He's a crazy old man." Marcus slowly removed his helmet, revealing a stern, deeply tanned face, framed by streaks of distinguished gray at his temples. His eyes, an intense, piercing blue, radiated such a formidable fury that Brock recoiled, stumbling backward over his own feet. "This crazy old man, as you so ignorantly call him, is James Callahan." Marcus's voice was an icy pronouncement, each word striking like a hammer blow. "A Vietnam hero, a man who has saved countless lives, and my combat brother, and you, young men, nearly ran over a child and then assaulted a decorated veteran. It seems you have truly chosen the wrong day to be foolish." At that precise moment, two police cruisers, their sirens wailing faintly in the distance, their cries almost swallowed by the diminishing roar of the helicopter, approached the scene. The officers, witnessing the Black Hawk hovering menacingly above, and the heavily armed Special Operations team on the ground, stopped at a respectful distance, their faces a tableau of utter bewilderment. Marcus made a sharp, decisive gesture to one of his operatives. "Kevin, secure them. And be careful. They might be armed with an inflated sense of self-importance." The Special Operations operatives moved with chilling efficiency towards Brock and his cronies. Their movements were swift, precise, and utterly devoid of hesitation. Brock, Randy, and Vince attempted a desperate, panicked scramble in different directions, but their efforts were futile. The operatives, moving like silent shadows, instantly encircled them, their gloved hands seizing the teenagers with brutal, professional efficiency, pinning them to the ground. Brock thrashed and struggled, but the iron grip of the operative instantly quelled his resistance. "What are you doing?" Brock shrieked, his voice thick with a pathetic, desperate despair. "I'm Jeffrey Gunner's son. You have no right." Marcus walked directly up to him, his gaze utterly devoid of sympathy, cold as Arctic ice. "Son, when you assault one of mine, you assault all of us. And your daddy? Tell him Colonel Anderson said hello. And tell him he needs to reassess his parenting methods. Now, these officers will be taking over." The police officers, finally emboldened, approached the scene. Officer Mike Wallace, a seasoned patrolman, immediately recognized Colonel Anderson. His eyes widened significantly in an expression of profound astonishment. "Colonel Anderson!" Officer Wallace exclaimed, his voice tinged with awe. "Sir, what is going on here?" "A lesson is being taught, officer," Marcus replied, his voice firm and unwavering. "These three assaulted a decorated veteran and attempted to run over a child. I believe you'll find ample grounds for their arrest." Officer Wallace nodded, his face grim, his gaze fixed on the subdued teenagers. He issued swift, concise orders to his subordinates, who efficiently applied handcuffs to Brock, Randy, and Vince. The teenagers, their faces pale and trembling, remained utterly silent, their earlier arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by a profound, chilling fear. Marcus turned to Jim once more, his expression softening considerably. "Are you absolutely certain you're all right, brother? We can get you to a military hospital if you need it." Jim smiled, a genuine, easy grin that reached his eyes. "No need to worry, Marcus. I've seen worse. But thank you for coming so quickly. I knew I could count on you." "You're my brother in arms, Jim," Marcus replied, his voice gruff with unspoken affection. "And I will always be there. Your call sign. It will always be heard." The Black Hawk helicopter, its mission accomplished, slowly ascended into the sky, its massive rotors blurring into a shimmering haze, its thunderous roar gradually diminished, fading into the peaceful expanse of the Oregon sky. The street below, now settling back into a fragile, shocked silence, was filled with the flashing lights of police cruisers and the hushed, awestruck whispers of bewildered onlookers. Jim Callahan, standing quietly on the sidewalk, gently stroked the dog biscuit intended for Buddy. He felt a profound weariness, but it was tempered by an equally profound sense of quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, swiftly and decisively, and a powerful lesson had been delivered. And those who had so carelessly mocked an old man now understood the true, formidable cost of disrespect.